Yeah.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Office of National Drug Control Policy and DOJ Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Saving Our Youth from Alcohol and Drugs, How Faith Leaders Can Help. My name is Jamila Robinson, and I'm a policy analyst at the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and I will serve as your co-moderator for today, along with David Wilson, who's a senior public health analyst with the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. David Wilson has more than 20 years of experience in health and behavioral health communications at SAMHSA, and he's a part of the materials development team in CSAP's Division of State Systems Development and is the coordinator for SAMHSA's National Prevention Week. Mr. Wilson was also CSAP's faith-based program coordinator previously. I'm happy to introduce today's panelists. Each of their photos and bios can be found in the handouts pod on your dashboard. The panelists are Mr. John Sherbinsky, Section Chief, Office of Diversion Control, DEA, Ms. Liz Robertson, Prevention Research Branch Chief from NIDA, Susan Lamb, Executive Director, Healing and Transition Program in Florida, and Ms. Jocelyn Whitfield, Senior Public Health Advisor from SAMHSA's Faith-Based Center Initiative. Now I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Callie Long. She will discuss with you your technical capabilities and how to connect via Adobe.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Callie Long, and I am with OJJDP's National Training Technical Assistance Center. As your host, I would like to take a couple minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect, which will help you maximize your opportunity to participate in today's webinar. To view the bios and photos of the presentation panel, please access the Word documents, which are available now in the upper right quadrant of your webinar dashboard. The PowerPoint and handout is also located there for you to access. To send a chat message to me, your host, a panelist, or another attendee, click the menu icon in the upper right corner of the chat pod. Choose Start Chat With, then choose Hosts, Presenters, or Specific Attendees. Type your message into the chat box and hit enter or click the message bubble icon to send. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the name of the person registered and the total number of additional people in the room with you today. This will help us with our final count. Again, if you are viewing with a larger group, please type in the name of the person registered and the number of additional people joining you today. There will be 2 opportunities for Q&A throughout the presentation today. As questions arise, please send them to me to share with the panelists. During that time, we will take every opportunity to address some of the questions you have posed during the presentation. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to take a 5-minute online survey about today's presentation. We appreciate your feedback regarding this webinar. For those of you participating as a group, when you return to your office, please enter the link in the last slide in your web browser to share your feedback. And finally, this event will be archived in OJJDP's Training Center at www.intact.org in approximately 2 weeks. Again, thank you for joining us today. I'll turn it back over to Jamila.
Thank you, Callie. I now would like to introduce Mr. Eugene Schneeberg, Director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. He will be followed by Mr. David Mineta, Deputy Director for Demand Reduction, Office of National Drug Control Policy. Mr. Schneeberg, as Director of Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships for the U.S. Department of Justice, helps coordinate between White House and Department of Justice efforts to reach out to and partner with faith-based and other nonprofit organizations around the country. Under his leadership, the Center works to advance the goals of the President's National Fatherhood and Mentoring Initiative, assists in coordinating the National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention, and serves on the Federal Interagency Reentry Council. Please welcome Mr. Eugene Schneeberg.
Well, thank you, Jamila. I just want to thank everyone on the call today for taking time out of busy schedules to spend the next hour or so with us, lifting up an issue of critical importance: how faith and community-based leaders can support young people to avoid abusing alcohol and drugs. And I especially want to thank our co-conveners, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, in particular David Mineta for his leadership within that agency, I also want to thank the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention at DOJ for co-sponsoring this webinar, and Michelle and Callie Long from the National Training and Technical Assistance Center. You're going to hear from an amazing group of experts. So I'm equally excited with you all to take out my pen and pad to learn about trends in this space. And again, particularly want to thank all of you from throughout the country who have taken time to be with us today. My office, the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, stands ready and willing to work with you all. So if you're interested in reaching out to us, you can reach us at partnerships@usdoj.gov. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Eugene. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. David Mineta. Mr. David Mineta was confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate on June 22, 2010, to be the Deputy Director of Demand Reduction for the Office of National Drug Control Policy. In this position, Mr. Mineta oversees ONDCP's focus on promoting drug prevention and drug treatment programs, as well as its newly created focus on programs for individuals in recovery from addiction. Mr. Mineta's commitment to drug prevention and treatment services have been long-standing. I'd like to welcome you to Mr. David Mineta.
Thank you, Jamila, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'd first like to just extend a welcome to our panelists, our group of expert panelists. We're very fortunate, as Eugene just said, we're very fortunate to have this level of expertise on this panel. Also like to sort of shout out to Susan Lum in Florida for her taking the time also to join us from Florida. In addition, though, I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Director Schneeberg from Department of Justice Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Eugene is walking the talk every day, and I just want to thank him, as we are very, very grateful for this opportunity the center is providing for faith leaders on preventing substance abuse among youth. We recently released the 2013 National Drug Control Strategy, a science and evidence-based approach to reducing drug use and its consequences. And I would invite you to visit our website at www.whitehouse.gov/ONDCP to actually look at our strategy and also just our 21st century drug policy that is sort of the foundation of what we'll be talking about today. To fully implement the nation's drug policy, we must recognize the challenges before us, though. These include the continuing shift in prevention funding, incidents of violence across our nation, such as the shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, that have focused our attention on mental health issues in this country, and the pressing need to address the connections among substance use disorders, academic performance, truancy, and military and workforce preparedness. In light of these and other issues, it is essential that we work together more closely than ever to address the challenges in the prevention field. Troubling increases in youth marijuana use, cuts to drug use prevention resources, and state laws legalizing marijuana only make our jobs more difficult. But our nation has a history of overcoming obstacles, and I am hopeful we will succeed here as well. And while the task of preventing alcohol and drug use, particularly among youth, may be more challenging today, it is our responsibility, all of us, to protect the health and safety of our young people. And I'd like to challenge each of you to think about how your congregation will contribute to our shared mission to reduce drug use and its consequences, and how, together, all of us as partners, we can achieve the goals set forth in the strategy. We must be steadfast and continue to make prevention the focus of our efforts. And the more we can coordinate our resources, the broader and deeper will be our impact, and the greater our success. Faith leaders and faith-based organizations are important and fundamental parts of local communities. In fact, you are often the first individuals and groups people turn to for help, information, and support. So again, thank you to Eugene. Thank you to all of our experts. Thank you to you for being here and for your vital contribution to this partnership. We look forward to hearing more about how we can help and collaborate in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Mineta. At this point, we will go over the webinar objectives. Objective 1, understand how youth substance abuse is related to education, health, and violence challenges many communities face. Learn what makes youth more vulnerable to addiction and other negative consequences of substance abuse. Explore which new or re-emerging drugs of concern are growing in popularity, particularly among youth users. And examine the key elements of drug prevention, best practices, and connect with resources and tools to help faith-based and community leaders implement effective substance abuse prevention for youth. I'd now like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. John Szczerbinski, Office of Diversion Control, Drug Enforcement Agency. Mr. John Szczerbinski has been a special agent with the United States DEA since '91 and has worked in Washington, D.C. and Richmond field offices investigating both international and domestic high-level drug trafficking organizations. In 2003, Special Agent Szczerbinski was promoted to Supervisory Special Agent and supervised the DEA Task Force Group in Richmond, Virginia until August 2008, where he was transferred to DEA headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Please welcome Mr. John Szczerbinski.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting the DEA to participate in such an important topic and an important message here today. Over recent years, society has done a pretty good job about letting our children know the dangers of illicit drug use, drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. But what we have not talked to our children and teenagers about is the dangers associated with prescription drug abuse. How prescription drugs, when used improperly or abused, can be every bit as dangerous as the illicit drugs. I also want to talk to you briefly about a drug threat that we are experiencing in the United States. It is the synthetic drugs that are being sold as spice, herbal incense, and bath salts. I will discuss the dangers of these drugs as well. First, to talk about prescription drug abuse. Prescription drug abuse has been around for a long time. However, it is now the nation's fastest growing drug problem. In 2008, of the 36,000 unintentional drug overdose deaths, over 20,000 were attributed to prescription drugs. 73% of prescription drug overdose deaths involved opioid pain relievers. And there are more prescription pain reliever overdose deaths than cocaine and heroin combined. Many teens and adults mistakenly believe that pharmaceuticals are safer than street drugs for a variety of reasons. They're medicines. You can get them from doctors, pharmacies, friends, or family members. You don't have to go to traditional drug dealers to get them. Information on the effects of these drugs are widely available. There are fewer side effects than street drugs, and there's less shame attached to using them than street drugs. But what parents and teens need to understand that when over-the-counter and prescribed medications are used to get high, they are every bit as dangerous as street drugs. And when prescribed drugs are used by or distributed to individuals without prescriptions, it's illegal. I'll talk to you about some of the drugs of concern that we are seeing throughout the nation. I'm going to talk to you about pain medications like hydrocodone, oxycodone, oxymorphone, methadone, and fentanyl. We know them as Vicodin, Lorcet, Oxycontin, and Opana. The anti-anxiety medication alprazolam, we know it as Xanax. ADHD medications like Adderall and Ritalin, the cough syrups with codeine, and the muscle relaxants like Soma. First, to talk to you a little bit about pain medications. Hydrocodone is a Schedule III narcotic and the most prescribed pain medication in the United States. It's structurally related to codeine and equal to morphine in producing opiate-like effects. Oxycodone IRs, or the immediate release, also referred to as hillbilly heroin, OCs, and oxys. The effects of oxycodone are similar to morphine, and the potential for abuse and dependence is there as well. Oxycodone is twice the strength of hydrocodone and sells for about $1 per milligram on the street. A 30 milligram pill sells for $30, an 80 milligram pill for about $80. There is addiction and fatal overdoses associated with oxycodone abuse as well. Oxycodone is a Schedule II controlled substance with abuse liability similar to morphine. And just to let you know, heroin is also processed from morphine, so there's a very distinct relationship between oxycodone abuse and heroin use. So how are people abusing oxycodone? You can crush it. By doing that, you defeat the time release, and you can ingest it. You can crush and snort, crush, mix with water, heat and inject it. And would you believe you can smoke an oxycodone pill by simply placing a pill on foil, heat, and inhale the vapors? All these methods are used to abuse heroin as well. What we're seeing is a circle of addiction. When it comes to prescription pain medication abuse, we see it leading to heroin use as well. First, you get hooked on the most prescribed drug in the United States, hydrocodone. You build a tolerance to this drug and then move to something a little stronger, like the combination oxycodones. Those oxycodones are mixed with acetaminophen, and therefore you can't take a lot of it before you start having some side effects. So you move on to the single entity products like Oxycontin or Roxicodone. The problem is the street price for these oxys is about $1 a milligram, as I previously stated. A bag of heroin sells for about $15. If you're getting the same effects, it doesn't take you long before you switch to heroin for simple economic reasons. To validate my circle of addiction slide, this information was taken from the Detroit News. Here, an addiction medicine physician says that more youths have turned to heroin after abusing gateway prescription drugs. He also indicates that it comes down to economics and heroin is cheaper. Doesn't take long. You can Google this information online and find hundreds of newspaper articles that tell you the same thing. I also want to talk to you about Adderall abuse. Adderall is a Schedule II amphetamine, a stimulant drug. It is used to treat ADHD and is effective in weight loss. Abuse is prevalent among college students who often refer to it as college crack. It is used to lengthen academic and enhance athletic performance. Students are using it to replace coffee and Red Bull type stimulants. It sells for about $5 to $10 per pill on the illicit market and is also used by snorting, injecting, and smoking it. One thing to note, Adderall abusers are 5 times more likely to abuse prescription pain relievers and 8 times more likely to abuse the benzodiazepines or the downers. There's many other information about prescription drugs that you should educate yourself on. But now I'm going to move to a new synthetic designer drug threat. Since 2009, the United States has encountered over 200 new synthetic drug compounds. Most of these drugs are not controlled in the United States. These synthetic designer drugs are being marketed and sold as incense, bath salts, glass cleaner, shoe and carpet deodorizer, plant food, as well as many innocuous other names. These drugs are perceived as legal alternatives to marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, MDMA, LSD, and heroin. And they are often more dangerous than the traditional illegal drugs they are purported to mimic. From the 2011 Monitoring the Future survey, 1 in 9 high school seniors has admitted to trying one of these synthetic designer drugs. I will first talk to you about synthetic cannabinoids. These drugs are being marketed and sold as spice, herbal incense, potpourri, legal weed, and among many other names. These are just a few of the hundreds, if not thousands, of different packets that these drugs are sold under such names as Scooby Snacks, K2, Killer Buzz, Mr. Nice Guy, Cloud9, Zombie Matter, and many others. A synthetic cannabinoid is a drug that is applied to or laced on a plant material, then smoked. That is the primary reason that these drugs are commonly referred to as synthetic marijuana. They come from an unregulated and unlicensed industry with multiple manufacturers. These drugs are being sold in convenience stores, gas stations, and online. There is significant batch-to-batch variance or hotspots. There's no quality control. From week to week or batch to batch, you may have a different drug in each packet. Attempting to avoid prosecution, those that are selling these drugs are hiding behind the fact that it is being labeled as not for human consumption. Now to discuss drugs that are being marketed and sold as bath salts, plant food, and glass cleaner. These drugs are classified as synthetic cathinones. These synthetic cathinones are stimulant with hallucinogen properties. Again, it's unregulated and from an unlicensed industry. They are sold in convenience stores, gas stations, and online. And these drugs mimic MDMA or ecstasy, also methamphetamine. As you can see here, this package is labeled plant food and not for human consumption. It's being sold under the name Blow. The cost for this half-gram quantity in a small Ziploc baggie is about $40. It shouldn't take a drug agent with over 20 years of experience to look at this and say something isn't right. Blow is a street name for cocaine. The way it's packaged and sold is consistent with cocaine and methamphetamine in appearances. And who would pay $40 for a half gram of plant food? There are some adverse health effects that are being presented at hospital emergency rooms due to the abuse of these products as well. I'll just name a few of them. People are coming into the ERs with aggressive behavior, anger, anxiety, agitation, auditory and visual hallucinations, depression, panic attacks, paranoia, self-mutilation, suicidal ideations, and organ damage, just to name a few. To show you how quickly these drugs are coming into the market, we can look at the number of emergency room admissions. In 2010, there were more than 11,000 emergency room admissions for the smokable synthetic drugs. That more than doubled in 2011 to more than 28,000 ER admissions. For bath salt type products, there were more than 22,000 in 2011. There are also other drugs that you need to be aware of, such as the hallucinogens that are with chemical names like 25I and 25C-NBOME. It has a street name of N-bomb. These drugs mimic LSD both in appearance and effect. They have a hallucinogen effect and are abused orally or through nasal passages. We encounter them on blotter paper and in dropper bottles. Again, they're taken as a substitute for LSD, and they've been linked to several deaths nationally. Another drug that we're encountering in the U.S. is a synthetic opioid. The chemical name it's going by is AH-7921. This synthetic opioid drug mimics heroin. It is relatively new in the United States and has been seen in Europe, where they have had 21 overdose deaths associated with this drug. In this instance, it is being sold and marketed as badger repellent. However, like many of the other drugs, it is disguised and sold under many other names. I ask the parents to educate yourselves about prescription and synthetic designer drug abuse. There are excellent resources out there about drug abuse from DEA. We've got Get Smart About Drugs. This is a resource for parents. And for kids and teenagers, a website called Just Think Twice, and that's geared towards teenagers. As mentioned earlier, ONDCP and SAMHSA also have excellent resources in this area as well. Thank you for your time in this matter.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Liz Robertson. Dr. Robertson serves as Chief of Prevention Research Branch at the National Institute of Drug Abuse from '98 until 2011. In that capacity, she broadened the focus of the prevention research portfolio to include a developmental perspective that ranges from early childhood to adulthood. In addition, prevention intervention contexts such as the family, media, and existing service delivery systems were targeted for growth. High priority areas for continued portfolio development include the integration of HIV prevention into standard prevention paradigms, basic transdisciplinary prevention research, efficacy, effectiveness, and large-scale system trials for prevention methodology. Please welcome Dr. Liz Robertson.
Thanks, Jamila. Good afternoon, everyone. See so many different states and communities represented. My presentation focuses background information about drug abuse prevention and research, and then I'll move on to 4 principles of prevention drawn from the prevention research branch. Forward. Integral to the prevention research branch at the National Institute on Drug Abuse is a focus on the prevention of initiation and progression of drug use. Next. General back. Can you repeat this slide right here? Okay. Sorry, everybody, we had a little technical problem here. Integral to the prevention research at the National Institute on Drug Abuse is the mission of the Prevention Research Branch, which focuses on the prevention of initiation and progression of drug use to abuse. Next. This mission is accomplished through funding. You go to the next one, please. This mission is accomplished through funding developmentally based grants on the psychological and social behavioral approaches to the prevention of drug use, including interventions that address healthy development from the prenatal period into adulthood. This image illustrates the origins of drug abuse and addiction and emphasizes the interplay of biological and environmental factors, which, in combination with the opportunity to use drugs, can lead to substance use and abuse, and over time can result in changes in the brain and addiction. Prevention focuses on identifying risk factors for individuals or groups and intervening before the biological and environmental precursors of drug use behavior lead to either initiation or progression of use. This finding illustrates that point. It is from the Strong African American Families Program, which incidentally was administered through faith-based organizations. They collected and examined genetic data from youth after the intervention was completed. On this chart, you see the intervention and control groups were each divided into 2 groups, those with and those without genetic risk. On this chart, you see that the intervention group with both genetic risk and no genetic risk were very low on expression of risk behaviors, which were a combination of psychological and social risk behaviors. In contrast, the control group, within the control group, those at genetic risk had very high expression of those behaviors. This diagram graphically illustrates our mission through depicting the stages of life, the important environments of development, and development-related events that present both risk and protection over the life course. Transitions between stages of development are often called periods of vulnerability because the biological, cognitive, psychological, and social changes occurring within and around the individual present both opportunities and risks. Interventions are often targeted to these points of vulnerability to help promote positive development through building age-appropriate skills, competencies, and abilities, such as self-control and social skills during the transition to middle and high school. This systems perspective frames development within context, considers interactions and transactions between the child and other individuals such as parents and peers, within those important contexts such as home, school, or peer organizations, and considers the influence of contexts in which the child is not actually present. For example, the stress of the parent's workplace on their development. In addition to periods of vulnerability and environments, there are some individuals or groups who have characteristics that should be considered in the selection and implementation of prevention interventions. These characteristics include those that are relatively unchangeable, such as gender, and those that can be manipulated to achieve better developmental outcomes, such as learning style. This slide lists some of the environments or contexts that can provide venues for the implementation of prevention interventions. Individuals and groups with characteristics that place them at risk can be helped through prevention interventions that address those risks. These categories indicate the level of risk addressed by the prevention intervention. Universal interventions target the general population. Selective interventions are for groups or individuals at risk due to some shared characteristics such as living in a high crime neighborhood. And indicated interventions are for individuals who have begun using drugs but are not diagnosable. In addition, there are interventions that include multiple levels of risk. We call these tiered interventions. All of these previously mentioned environments can be venues for the implementation of interventions for individuals and groups at all levels of risk. However, the last two columns are some of the contexts where the focus of the interventions implemented is more likely to be on groups and individuals at the selected and indicated levels of risk. There are many strategies that have been used in addressing specific levels of risk within a variety of contexts. These strategies can focus on intrapersonal factors, such as emotion regulation, interpersonal factors, such as parenting style, and environmental factors, such as classroom management strategies. Given all of this, I know that the burning question on your minds must be, well, how are interventions conceptualized to work, and how are prevention research studies structured? Well, this is my take on it. Moderators are the fixed or virtually unchangeable factors mentioned before, so gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. Although moderators are unchangeable, they can and do affect modifiable risks, so they must be taken into account. The modifiable risk factors are those factors that are hypothesized to be open to change, such as the development of social skills. Interventions provide activities and information designed to influence the modifiable risk factors through developing skills, abilities, and competencies. Moreover, interventions are typically targeted to points of vulnerability. The poll question. You should be seeing a poll question in just a moment. Which factors can be modified by reducing the risk of drug use? Please make your selection. So 91% of you, almost 92%, selected all of the above, which is the correct response. For adolescents, these are some of the risks that could be assessed for targeting specific problems. And specifically for drug abuse and delinquency, here are risk factors that we know could be addressed through interventions in the family, school, peer, and community environments. The core principle of prevention is that drug abuse prevention works. There are many other identified principles of prevention that are presented in the booklet shown here, Preventing Drug Abuse Among Children and Adolescents. The staff of the Prevention Research Branch is currently working on a third edition of this booklet, where we reviewed the last 10 years of research. We have identified a number of additional principles. The following slides are examples that come from the current research on programs that target different ages with a concentration on early to middle adolescence, at different levels of risk, but with an emphasis on universal interventions. These interventions have different approaches and take place in different environments, but they have all been found to reduce drug use and abuse and other problem behaviors in the target population. The first emerging principle is that prevention interventions can have long-term effects on drug use and abuse. The Good Behavior Game is a universal school-based intervention which was administered in the first and second grades by teachers trained in classroom management, behavior management. The intent of the program is to socialize young children to the student role, thereby preventing aggressive, disruptive behavior. Incidentally, SAMHSA is doing a large scale scale-up of this program in a number of sites across the United States. This randomized control trial followed subjects from childhood into adulthood. The data presented here are for subjects between the ages of 19 and 21 years. The results show that those males who were rated as highly aggressive by their teachers in first grade and who were in the Good Behavior Game classrooms were significantly less likely to have drug abuse or dependence disorders in young adulthood compared with youth in the control group. These findings clearly indicate that prevention interventions can have long-term effects on drug use and abuse. This may be especially true for interventions delivered in early childhood. We know that many youth can exhibit multiple risk behaviors. Thus, the second emerging principle is a very important one. Prevention interventions can have unintended positive effects on health-risking behaviors that are not targets of the original intervention. The Life Skills Training Program is an academic, social, and resistance skill-based prevention intervention for middle school students. Participants were followed up after 6 years after the program ended. Youth in the intervention group were significantly less likely to have violations and points on their Department of Motor Vehicles records relative to the control group. Other findings that exemplify this principle are in the areas of academic and career achievement, sexuality, criminality, and mental health. The third emerging principle is that high-risk populations may benefit the most from prevention interventions, even universal interventions. These findings come from a very large randomized control trial that implemented evidence-based family and school skill development interventions community-wide. This analysis examined marijuana use at 6.5 years after baseline data were collected. with stronger outcomes emerging over time. In this analysis, intervention and control groups were split into higher and lower risk groups. What we see here is very interesting. Among both groups, there is a slower growth in marijuana use for the intervention compared with the control group. However, the divergence is enlarged when the groups are split by risk, showing that it is the high-risk group that benefits the most from the intervention. This is the last principle I'll present, but is just one of many, many more. This slide shows an approach to family intervention focused on middle school students and targets substance use and antisocial behavior. Parents in the family checkup condition received a screening and brief intervention that provided feedback on family and parenting style strengths and weaknesses, and then offered follow-up services at the selective and indicated levels for at-risk families. About 25% of those families used the follow-up services. The intervention had a wide range of positive effects on health-risking behaviors. This result shows the long-term effects on arrest, with the effect becoming greater as time goes by. By age 17, the intervention group is very close to the baseline level, whereas the control group is showing escalating arrest rates. Moreover, this program has been shown to be cost-effective, saving $5 per dollar invested for a total savings of almost $2,000 per youth. On the NIDA website, drugabuse.gov, you'll find a brief illustration of this program with video scenarios where you can actually look at your own parenting behavior. In conclusion, when a prevention intervention is based on a sound theory of human behavior, targets a problem or problems that are readily identifiable with epidemiological data on risk factors and resources, the program strategies fit the target audience and context in which it will be delivered. There is capacity to deliver it with fidelity over time, and the intervention strategies have been empirically tested with results that demonstrate reduced initiation and progression of drug use. Then, the outcome of the implementing an evidence-based intervention has public health impacts and is cost beneficial. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, John and Liz. We will take a few questions now. The first question that came in for John is, what's a gateway drug?
I think that when I referenced that newspaper article that a physician described prescription drug abuse as a gateway drug to heroin, it's basically when someone's abusing a prescription pain medication, it will lead you to use of another drug. So it kind of leads you into another abuse of another drug.
The second question, will there be any policy control for synthetic drugs?
In July of 2012, the president signed into law making 26 of these new synthetic designer drugs a controlled substance, a Schedule I controlled substance. The problem is that those that are manufacturing these drugs are developing many more than that 26, and we're attempting to play catch up and with the new drugs that are entering the market. They're synthetic compounds that mimic the illicit drugs, and they are specifically designed by chemists to mimic the same effects as the illicit drugs like methamphetamine, LSD, cocaine, and heroin.
Great, thank you. We have a few questions for Liz. What is SAAF?
The name of the program is Strong African American Families. It's an adaptation of Strengthening Families, the Iowa Strengthening Families program. It's a relatively short program. It's about 5 sessions where parents meet in parent groups and talk about good parenting. Youth meet in youth groups and talk about family-based communication strategies. And then the parents and the family children get back together and practice these strategies that they've learned in the 2 groups. It could easily be adapted for faith-based organizations. In fact, that's something that I've tried to get research going on in the last 5 years and really can't find anybody to take on the challenge.
Thank you, Liz. The next question, where can we get a list of illegal synthetic drugs?
That's kind of a tough question because these substances are sold and we don't know the exact compound that it's in the drug itself until it is analyzed by a chemist to let us know what the drug is. These kind of rogue chemists that are producing these drugs are tweaking the molecules in the chemical compound ever so slightly that it varies from the controlled substance but has the same general effect. But generally, if you go online and do some research, like from the listed websites that we mentioned, either ONDCP's or DEA's websites, they'll give you a general idea of how these drugs are being sold, and where and what type of packaging. And you can find it on the internet like kids generally do. They do their research and find out what is being abused and then try to find it that way.
Thank you, John. We have another question for Liz. Does Good Behavior Games need follow-up over the years to be successful?
No. The benefit of the follow-up of the research was that we got to see how changing early behavior really can have a long-term effect on many different behaviors. So the developers of the program, Shepard Kellum and Nicholas Ialongo, published a whole journal recently based on findings out of this particular intervention, showing that it had positive effects not only on addictive disorders, but also on suicide, career, educational attainment, HIV risk, and many other risk factors.
This is our last question, and then we will hand it off to our next presenters. Last question is, are there people trying to find whatever they can to alter their states?
These you shouldn't be classified as whatever they can. These are specific chemical compounds that are designed to mimic the effects of these the illicit drugs. So they're being packaged not for human consumption to basically throw people off, except for those that are using and abusing these drugs. They know exactly what they're used for, so it's not exactly whatever they can find to alter their states. There are specific drugs that are being designed for that purpose.
Thank you all. Please continue with the questions. We hope at the end of the webinar we will compile all of your questions and post responses and archive that on the website along with the actual audio and webinar. So at this time, I'd like to transition over to Mr. David Wilson, and he will introduce our next 2 presenters.
Thank you, Jamila. Of this webinar, you've heard about the problem and the consequences. You've heard about specific drugs and drug trends and prevention and intervention. Now our final 2 presenters will speak to our last objective, which is to examine some key elements of best practices around drug prevention, specifically around faith-based organizations, and more importantly, highlighting some resources and tools to help faith-based and community leaders implement effective substance abuse prevention programs for youth and for our young people. So first, I would like to introduce Susan Lum. Susan is the Executive Director of the Healing and Transition Program located in Longwood, Florida, or HAT. And the HAT program is a faith-based, non-residential reentry day program that serves men and women who have recently been released from incarceration. HAT assists each program participant with customized planning through the, as we all know, the difficult reentry process. And Ms. Lum is responsible for the day-to-day operations and program delivery. Susan?
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and a privilege to be a part of this webinar today on such an important topic, and I really do feel privileged to be a part of such an esteemed panel. So for the next several minutes, I'm going to be sharing with you how faith leaders can help and are helping in the reentry process for those who will and have been recently released from incarceration, whether it be jail or prison. Supportive, collaborative support during this time of transition is critical. We believe at HAT, and we believe it more every day, that creating or increasing positive connections in the lives of returning citizens, as we call them, will result in changes in moral and spiritual behavior, preventing a return to criminal behaviors. So what does that look like? What does that mean? So what's HAT? It's a faith-based non-residential reentry program that offers pre- and post-release curriculum and services to men and women who have recently been released from incarceration and will be returning to the Central Florida area. We provide those pre- and post-release reentry services through a network of providers with an emphasis on the mentoring process. It's all about relationships. A continuum of local churches working together form the volunteer structure that supports the returning citizen as well as their families. Our goal is to provide safer communities, supportive family units, and a new start for those who've been incarcerated, whether it be in local county jails or prisons. Faith communities can offer and do offer a transition and healing environment where non-judgmental acceptance, love, caring, forgiveness, reconciliation, redemption, and restoration can occur. The HAT program is a partnership of those enhanced faith-based programs, and it starts inside the jail. It's combined with a coaching mentoring program that's supported by faith-based organizations and churches in the community. This tightly knit collaboration allows for healing and transition to those returning to our communities from jail. This pre-release program is the beginning of the healing process. So let me share with you what the goals of the HAT program are. Our first goal is to transform the hearts and the minds, because transformation begins with the renewal of our minds. That pre-release process addresses just that. It's the beginning of the heart and mind process. We'll talk more about that later as we talk about pre-release and post-release. We've got to create a sense of inclusion to these often citizens that are often go unnoticed. The sense of inclusion begins as the mentors begin to develop relationships with them pre-released. The mentors actually go into the jail. They've agreed to have relationships with these soon-to-be released returning citizens. They begin to feel that sense of inclusion as though they're a member of a church family because they join us in live web stream worship each week. It also begins as they attend Celebrate Recovery inside the jail, which is a faith-based 12-step recovering program. They hear their peers speak in truth, and they learn to begin to speak in transparency as part of the process of the healing initiative. Mentoring groups outside, including pro-social activities, which are activities that create positive interaction as opposed to the antisocial interactions and behaviors they may have experienced in the past. The desired outcome for the pro-social activity is the learning of that non-criminal alternative behavior. Mind mindset changes, pre-release and post-release curriculum addressing and then beginning to accept that they are not what they've done. Reducing the stigma and shame is also associated with the pro-social activities, positive social interactions with strong mentors and church family. These are goals that are connected with more than just the returning citizen. These are goals for the community, churches, and the workplace, because both benefit when the goal of safer, stronger communities are reached. So what do HAT services look like? The services inside the jail or the pre-release program is a 10-week pre-release curriculum. It also includes transition planning, which is the most critical part of this pre-release process, that 24-hour transition plan that says, what am I going to do within those first 24 hours of my release? This most often determines whether we will see them in the outside program. It's a huge challenge. We talk about character building, which addresses such topics as morals, values, personality versus character, skill sets and talents that help to identify job and career interests. And then we also talk about mentoring. That's where we have mentors who are working with them individually, as well as having others from surrounding churches or stations of hope begin to make a connection with them inside in preparation for that outside mentoring process. We begin the family process before that returning citizen is released. We work with them on MRT, which is moral recognition therapy. It's a systematic cognitive behavioral therapy, a step-by-step treatment strategy that's designed to enhance self-image, promote growth of a positive, productive identity, and facilitate the development of higher stages of moral reasoning. Outcome is less risky thinking and feelings and adopting pro-social activities. There's worship service inside, live web stream worship, where they start to become part of a church maybe that they would never have otherwise experienced. And then there's Celebrate Recovery, once again, inside and outside, that faith-based 12-step recovery program that addresses the whole family. Inside, the outside services, 14 to 16-week whole life training, which includes such topics as communication, relationship building, integrity, living solid. It speaks to, again, pro-social activities where they start to attend outside activities such as church as a family, where their children, or they can see their children and their families. They start to get involved with mentors, strong Christian mentors who continue to show them the path along the way of re-entering into their communities. Substance abuse classes inside, MRT continued, reintegration planning, that last 30 days from graduation, where we start to work on job search and family plans, social services, medical, dental, housing. Where can they find those services and how can they continue to be supported after graduating from the program? And again, career development, networking via their outside activities. They've now begun to develop relationships through their mentor, through their churches, through their outside pro-social activities. Neighborhood partners have become a big part of their career development. One of the things that we know that they struggle with is relationships. This is a diagram that we show them inside in the pre-release program that resonates loud and clear with them. So what does this mean? It's a simple math problem as we explain it to them. Rarely do they just make one trip to jail, or do they have one bad influence in their life. As you can see, you have the returning citizen, and you see all of these lines for the numerous times that they go in and out of jail or prison, the numerous past life bad influences that they've had. And as you can see down below, they've got one connection to a church, maybe one or two or three people that could be good mentors for them, if any. So what do we do about that? We ask them where they're presently being pulled. The direction of addition is the end result. What are you adding to your life, negative or positive? Going to church once doesn't solve your problem. We have to add to our base of positive touch points. The more we add, the more we increase our chances for positive change in thought, actions, and outcomes. The same is true for reducing the number of positive touch points. We reduce our chance of positive touch points and increase the potential for negative outcomes. We discovered that increased positive touch points are a direct correlation to positive outcomes. Simple addition and subtraction. How does the life process of addition and subtraction? We will either end up on the positive or the negative side of life, depending on our choices. Well, what about family support? Well, many times the family bridges have been burned. Trust is low at best, and the insanity cycle is all too familiar. Well, we know that family support is key to reentry. We also know that no one goes to jail alone. The whole family does time. So the whole family must be addressed. We began to establish during the pre-release program in the jail, we asked them what their current support team looks like, and we use what's known as the self-sufficiency matrix, which uses 17 different domains, which ask them to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 their current level of relational support from family, friends, their current health of their environment, where they are in the job market, money, housing, childcare, etc. As we continue to assess their family support, we ask them to identify, using a tool called the Circle of Support, where their support is today, so we can better able contact those family members and ask for permission of the participant to contact them to find out if the family may be willing to get involved in their transition and be an active part of the team we're building with them. We educate the family members on the HAP program, and we ask them if they're willing to get involved and continue dialogue with us pre and post-release. Many family members contact us in reference to a program for their soon-to-be-released family member. Let me give you a quick example. We had a young gal in our program who was being released within 60 days from Hernando Correctional Institute, which is a prison up in North Florida. Her family contacted us, her mother and her father, and said they had heard about our program through their local church, and they wanted to find out if our program may be a fit for their daughter. So we started working with them 60 days prior to her release. They came in, and they observed the HAP program. They attended Celebrate Recovery. They watched live worship service. They saw some of those pro-social activities, the Bible studies, the mentoring programs that were available. And they told their daughter about that as she sat in prison. She wrote us a letter, and she told us that she believed that the HAP program was key to her transition from prison back into her community, her family, her church, and the workplace. She did, in fact, join us, and we spent the 16 months with her and her family as she walked through the HAP program and its completion. Another example of a young man who was in our county jail, had spent numerous days in the county jail, several times as a matter of fact, and had been through 6 different recovery programs and had not completed any of them successfully. His mother came to us as somewhat of a last resort. She too had heard about us from a church member. We spoke, brought him here upon his release, and we spent several hours speaking with them. He was doubtful that this program would work either. 16 weeks later, he walked across that stage, graduating for the first time from anything, and today continues to work and be a productive member of his family and his community as well. So as you can see, beginning to orient the family on how they can get involved in the healing process is critically important as we begin to transition these returning citizens back into their home, their community, their church, and the workplace. So what about intervention? When we talk about intervention, we mean family intervention. Again, no one goes to jail alone. The whole family goes with them. So we've got to prepare them for the new paradigm of whole family life. So those stations of hope or community churches that provide spiritual support as well as basic need support are critical. The family is surrounded by those who've been trained to work with returning citizens. Faith-based organizations and churches that are willing and committed to walk alongside, creating positive touch points of support and encouragement, are critical to the change process and the rebuilding of families, and the change process of people, places, and things. A sense of inclusion is life-changing. And what about mentoring? We talked about Celebrate Recovery, the faith-based 12-step program. There's also Celebration Station for the children, and the Landing for those middle school and high school students. The children of these returning citizens, it's for the entire family, parents, spouses, etc. Getting healing for themselves so that regardless of the outcome for the returning citizen, the family can move on with their lives in a healthy way. Again, positive touch points for healing, support, and inclusion. Loving people the way God loves them, modeling trust, endurance, and perseverance. Well, how does all this affect family dynamic? There has to be a willingness of the family, an availability of family. Celebrate Recovery as whole family healing requires willingness, not willfulness. Bible studies, service opportunities for the whole family. It's about whole family healing. Well, let me talk about some of the assessment tools that we use. When we first meet a client in the jail, they're given a packet to complete. Included in this packet are various intake worksheets and assessments. First, they complete the basic intake form, which provides demographics, employment, self-reported substance abuse, prior treatment information, and so on, as well as a signed release of information form. Next, an assessment, a criminal thinking scale assessment, or TCU, is completed and scored, providing an understanding of the participant's criminal thinking. The next assessment we use is the Eureka assessment. It's a readiness to change theory. This helps us understand the client's readiness to change. The self-sufficiency matrix, which I spoke of earlier, helps us gather info in those 17 domains as mentioned previously, enabling us to better work their program for them specifically, with them. We ask them to write a letter to themselves while in jail, to capture the sights, sounds, smells, and their thoughts while they were in the jail. So often we forget once we get out. Many times, this particular activity is used to refocus an individual who may be straying off course. Those are just some of the tools that we use in the process of healing and transition. So let's talk about a success story. This young lady, take for example, Mary. She's depicted here. She was arrested 14 times in 10 years. She's a young woman who served time in prison and she returned to reoffend due to drugs. Many ask, why wasn't she rehabilitated in prison? Why does she keep going back to jail? Why? Well, Mary attended one worship service while she was in jail. And she was so overcome with emotion that she approached me following the service and she said, no one's ever cared about what I do. You seem to care. Will you help? Of course we said yes. She enrolled in the HAP program on the outside. Her time in the program allowed her to develop a deep relationship with the Lord. Instead of being sentenced to 2 more years in prison, she's been given the opportunity to attend drug court, a 1-year program. She's learned accountability, structure, and now has the tools to move forward in her life, worshiping God and raising her son in a Christian household. This is Mary today. I see her on a regular basis because she was hired full-time by the company that she shadowed with during her time in the HAP program. She continues to work on her recovery through Celebrate Recovery, NA, with her sponsor, accountability team, and many mentors who've come alongside her. She received her 1-year sobriety chip in February, and she will graduate from drug court in June. So all that being said, what are the outcomes of HAT? For those who are a participant in HAT, meaning they participated for at least 14 days or more in the HAT program, we see a 21% recidivism rate within the first 12 months. For those who graduate, and graduate means completing the program, which is defined as meeting all graduation requirements, service requirements, homework, etc., we see a 10% recidivism rate within that first year. And employment through those partnerships of community employers who have come alongside us and said, yes, we will hire a HAT graduate because we know what they've gone through the last 14 to 16 weeks, and we know the faith that has come along with that. So 70% of the HAT graduates are employed either prior to or immediately following their graduation. All that being said, there are challenges. Only 15% make it from HAT Inside to the HAT Outside program. Why is that? Well, there's many factors. That doorstep to doorstep. Inside is very transitional. Many only experience 2 or 3 classes before they're released. Many of them are pre-sentenced in the program, which means once they're sentenced, they leave the facility. So there is a bit of a revolving door as you do that inside pre-release program. And some, quite frankly, just don't show up. From jail to prison, we have found that it is highly dependent upon, from jail to our front door is highly dependent upon who picks them up that day. What was that 24-hour transition program or transition plan? The most critical part of the pre-release. Do they have a plan for those first 24 hours upon release? And if so, that plan must include transition. What about housing? An ongoing challenge. We work with local missions, but the demand is greater than the supply. We are a non-residential program. There's an extreme shortage for women. Our participants don't work while they're in the program because they are in the program 6 days a week and 3 nights a week. Funding for the recently incarcerated is always a challenge. Even a greater challenge is the housing. Men and women's housing units would lend to growth of the program and solve issues such as transportation and shelter. How about employment partners? More successful job shadowing components are critical so that they learn how to be successful in the work environment. Scheduled, consistent progress communication from supervisors to HAT program director and supervisor to the HAT participant is essential so that they always know whether they're progressing and where they are in that work component. Many have never worked. I was in the jails last week teaching one of the curriculums from HAT on the inside, and I asked a simple question: how many of you were employed before you were arrested? Not one hand went up. How many of you are employed within 30 days of being arrested? One hand went up. How many within 6 months? Another hand went up. How many of you have never been employed? 15 other hands went up. So basic job interviewing processes, how to work in the work market. Developing relationships with the local business partners that will interview our graduates when openings are available is critical. We case manage for the first 90 days through that probationary period. So many of you may be asking, well, how do I do this? At least I hope many of you are asking, how do I do this? How can others learn from us? Well, we're often asked how others can replicate what we're doing in their community, at their church, or with their local county jail. Well, our answer is always the same. It begins with building relationships. Become part of a reentry task force in your community, or start one. We're happy to come alongside any faith community interested in serving the returning citizens and their families. What did we learn from our 3-year journey? And yes, we're just 3 years old. There are many exciting times and many setbacks. Returning citizens will often disappoint us, but we remember that we're planting seeds that we may never experience their full growth. Faith-based organizations and government relationships can often be challenging simply because we come from different perspectives. So the investment in relationships cannot be overemphasized. Funding, housing, and community support, as mentioned above, are all difficult to overcome and must be central to the development of any reentry initiative. Understanding the corrections culture and how to live within it is a significant challenge that comes with time and, again, relationships. In terms of best practices, creating an environment that supports evidence-based outcomes and the needs of the participants is a learning process. Thank you so much for letting me share with you today and be part of this amazing webinar.
Oh, and thank you, Susan, for sharing your valuable information and sharing your success stories. Our final presenter is someone that I consider, you spoke of mentoring programs, is someone I consider my professional faith-based mentor. I consider her a friend, and she is definitely a colleague. Ms. Jocelyn Whitfield is the Senior Public Health Advisor and Coordinator of the Community and Faith-Based Initiatives within the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA. She is the only SAMHSA employee committed full-time to the Faith-Based Initiative, and I know that it has been one of her professional missions for the past 20 years, working towards building the capacities of grassroots communities and faith-based organizations. She serves as the SAMHSA liaison to the Department of Health and Human Services Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships and the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. So without any further ado, Ms. Jocelyn Whitfield with some valuable resources and technical tools.
Thank you, David. It is really a pleasure this afternoon to speak to you on behalf of SAMHSA. First of all, I want to thank you for participating in this webinar. And I would want to even thank you for just investing your time this afternoon. For the last 20 years, SAMHSA has worked with faith-based organizations to ensure that they are effective partners with government, including SAMHSA. Through capacity building opportunities and the utilities of best practice tools and toolkits and skill development activities, over 20,000 community and faith-based organizations have benefited. Today I want to talk about some of the resources that have been very useful for faith-based organizations. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about SAMHSA. I've had the opportunity to travel almost all throughout our country to present at some of the capacity building meetings. And often I find that a lot of the community and faith-based organizations have never really heard of SAMHSA. They really know a little bit about the centers, but I just wanted to give you a brief kind of overview of SAMHSA this afternoon to let you know what their vision is and what their mission is, and to introduce you to some of their centers. SAMHSA believes that folks suffering from substance use and mental health illnesses should have the care that is necessary to help them live productive lives. To this end, SAMHSA believes that behavioral health is essential to health prevention work when we get the most beneficial tools and knowledge in the hands of the community, including faith-based organizations, to work with us. We know that treatment is effective because treatment has benefited so many, and there are so many pathways to recovery. We know that people do recover, and they use different pathways to do so. I want to talk a little bit about the three centers and our mission. SAMHSA's mission is to reduce the impact of substance abuse and mental illness on America's communities. We have 4 centers. We have the Center for Mental Health Services, which is called CMHS, and they lead our federal efforts to treat mental illnesses by promoting mental health and the development and to prevent the development of or worsening of mental illness among the community and community consumers. We have the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, and we will be talking a lot about them this afternoon because they head up, they're the national leadership in the federal effort to prevent alcohol, tobacco, and drug problems. Also, there's the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment. That's where I work full-time with, and that CSAP promotes the quality and the availability of community-based substance abuse treatment services for individuals and families who need them. CSAP also works with the state. And community-based groups to improve and expand existing substance abuse treatment services under the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Block Grant Program. One of our latest or newest centers is the Center for Behavioral Health Statistics and Quality. And they have primary responsibility for the collection, analysis, and dissemination of behavioral health data. SAMHSA strategic initiatives. SAMHSA has 8 strategic initiatives, but I would like to focus on the one that is presented before you. We believe that prevention is critical, and so our first initiative focused on the prevention of substance abuse and mental illness, creating communities where individuals, families, schools, we're creating communities where individuals, families, schools, faith-based organizations, and workplaces take action to promote emotional health and reduce the likelihood of mental illness, substance abuse, including tobacco and suicide. This initiative focuses on the nation's high-risk youth in tribal communities, and military families. I would like to talk about some of our prevention resources because I believe that if you get tools into the hands, the correct tools, the most appropriate tools in the hand of community leaders, faith and otherwise, then a lot of our work is already done. We have a lot of prevention resources. We have websites and we have campaigns that we just released one today that I will share with you. And these are only a few in the interest of time. But please go to your SAMHSA website for additional information regarding these and others. There is an interagency coordinating committee on prevention of underage drinking. The focus of this committee is to focus on underage drinking, to host a series of webinars on preventing underage drinking. The website for this particular committee is Stop Alcohol Abuse Government. It offers community a wealth of information and resources. And I think this is one of the greatest websites for resources for SAMHSA. There is another website that I want to make you familiar with, and that's Too Smart to Start website. It targets community leaders, families, and educators. It provides resources and tools to help young people avoid underage alcohol use and its consequences. It also promotes underage alcohol use prevention messages that will influence the attitude and behaviors of youth, their parents, and the broader community. The website is www.toosmarttostart.samhsa.gov. Another important campaign, I think, that was just launched yesterday. It is a new prevention campaign for underage drinking. It is called Talk, They Hear You, targeted to parents and other caregivers of youth 9 to 15 years of age. The campaign provides them with the tools and information parents need to start talking with their children early about the dangers of alcohol. So we're working hard to address the needs of that particular population. This week at SAMHSA and nationally, we are celebrating our National Prevention Week. This is the annual prevention health observance dedicated to increasing public awareness of substance abuse and mental health issues and to create and strengthen community partnerships. And David may speak a little more about that at the end of this presentation. One of the other resources that we have, I think it's a very important resource, is the National Registry of Effective Practices. And this is where you can find some of our best practices, a searchable online registry of more than 160 interventions supporting mental health promotion, substance abuse prevention, and substance abuse treatment. There is another initiative that I really think is very important because it is coalition-based. It's coalition-based community prevention systems to prevent youth problem behaviors, including underage drinking, tobacco use, violence, delinquency, school dropout, and substance abuse. Here are just a few additional resources that I think that you would be interested in. It is a screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. We call it SBIRT. And it is a comprehensive early intervention public health approach for identifying persons with substance use disorders and those at risk. There are some prevention grant opportunities that you may want to avail yourselves of or to find out about. These are competitive discretionary grants, and they are targeted to community and faith-based organizations and state governments. They are Strategic Prevention Framework Partnerships for Success, the Sober Truth on Preventing Underage Drinking Act grants, STOP Act grants, Drug-Free Communities support programs, and you can all find all of these on SAMHSA's website as well. There are several grant opportunities, and I know that these grant opportunities may be of interest of you. I think the greatest work that we have done at SAMHSA has really been with our publications and our resources, and so I want to share some of them with you. We have a new publication and also a video that will be coming out in the next 2 months. It is called Building Strong and Effective Partnerships Among Community and Faith-Based Organizations. It is a video and a guide. It elaborates on the benefits and challenges of working together, secular and faith-based organizations. It outlines strategies on building blocks for developing sustainable community partnerships. SAMHSA has had real success with all of our publications, but I think that this publication is quite unique. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes when I talk about our collaborative partnerships. Some of the other publications that I really believe in, toolkits that will be helpful to you and useful to you, are Successful Strategies for Recruiting, Training, and Utilizing Volunteers. It is a guidance handbook designed for community groups and faith-based organizations seeking to maximize the skills of their volunteers, expand their services to the community, and enhance their effectiveness. We have another publication that I really think is geared towards clergy and congregations and has been very, very effective over the last 11 years, and that is called Faith-Based Core Competencies in Substance Abuse Knowledge. Core competencies that enable clergy and other pastoral ministers to break through the wall of silence and to encourage faith communities to become actively involved in the effort to reduce alcoholism and drug dependence. There is also what I call a technical tool, guidance tool that we provide for folks who really are interested in becoming prevention counselors and substance abuse counselors or mental health counselors, and that is the National Review of State and Alcohol and Drug Treatment Programs and Certification Standards. What this publication provides, it presents each state licensing, certification, and credentialing standards for alcohol abuse and drug abuse treatment facilities, programs, counselors, and prevention professionals. It discusses the accreditation process, fees, and the types of services provided. One of the most resourceful tools that we have used over the last year, and I think it's been very important for faith-based organizations, is the tool guidance publication that we have on maximizing program services through private sector partnerships and relationships. And the reason why this is so important, we realize the government, the funding is limited. We know that the competition is really steep when competing for these grants, but there are foundations and corporations in your local communities that you can benefit from that fund those folks and those projects and community organizations in their own local communities. So this book will help you engage these corporations by establishing partnership relationships with them so that funding and resources can be provided for your community project. The other toolkit that has been really touted, one of the national best practice toolkits, is Sustaining Grassroots Community-Based Organizations. And this book contains, it is a 6-book toolkit on best practices to help grassroots organizations and faith-based organizations develop effective substance abuse and mental health treatment services and social services. It discusses organizational assessment, sustainability, strategic planning, financial management, fund development, and fundraising and evaluation. A very effective toolkit, and that is used by, I guess, hundreds of faith-based organizations, and is still being used today. We have a couple of reports that are really significant that I want to talk about, and These are dialogues that we have had with the faith community, and one is Bridging Bridges, and this is mental health, consumers, and members of the faith and community organization dialogue. And the reason why I'm mentioning those is that we're finding out, and that basically that a lot of the youth that have mental health issues also have substance abuse issues as well. We have one on the other is on the role of faith-based communities in preventing suicide, a report of an interfaith suicide prevention dialogue. And I'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about some of the training that is provided for them. We have webcasts that you can just go on SAMHSA's web site and you can view for yourself. We have Faith and Recovery, the healing role of faith-based organizations, the role of faith and community-based systems in addiction treatment and recovery, building communities of recovery, how community-based partnerships and recovery support organizations may make recovery work. The fact is that we recognize that we cannot work in silos, that we have to, did something happen? Control, delete. Okay. Okay, great. We recognize that basically that these resources are important to the community as well as the faith-based community. There are a few training and technical assistance, capacity building. There are a few capacity building training and technical assistance meetings that are coming up shortly that you may be interested in. We have a faith-based and neighborhood partnership capacity building meeting that will be held in Hartford, Connecticut, and that's April the 9th through the 10th this year. I mean, that's May the 9th through the 10th, 2013. And faith-based and neighborhood partnership capacity meeting will also be held in Helena, Montana. That's June the 11th through the 12th. And each year we really hold a community leaders and interfaith partnership summit where we select faith-based and community teams and community leaders from selected communities with economic depressed communities to come in and talk about establishing partnerships and working together to build a collaborative network in their community. The mental health first aid training is available for our faith-based clergy and churches and synagogues and houses of worship. It is an innovative training program to equip their congregations with the skill to recognize mental illness and respond to mental health emergencies. Why is this resource important? Alcohol is the drug most commonly used among teens and one of the risk factors associated with teen suicide, and is known to contribute to depressive symptoms. 80% of high school seniors have used alcohol at some point. I'm going to conclude with just mentioning two other resources that we have, and also talking a little bit about our collaborative network. And shortly, we have two other resources that I think you can use. I'm going to do this very quickly. This is QPR Institute. It offers comprehensive suicide prevention training programs and resources. Applied suicide intervention skills training provides caregivers with tools to help them to prevent the immediate risk of suicide. Action Alliance Task Force on Faith Communities. It generates or distributes educational and training materials for use by faith-based communities in their efforts to prevent suicide and care for the survivors of completed suicide. Each year we hold an annual Community Leaders and Interfaith Summit, and each year the outgrowth of the summit has produced about 27 collaboratives throughout the United States, and they're working on behalf of SAMHSA to provide a collective response to the substance abuse and mental health issues that are pervasive in our communities. And I think that's about it, right? We didn't put on the collaboratives. We didn't have the slide. Oh, yeah. And these are the collaboratives, and these are the states which you may find them, where you may find.
So thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you to all of our speakers and presenters for this webinar. Because we gave you so much knowledge and information, we won't be able to conduct the second question and answer session that we had planned. However, I do want to remind you that all of the questions that you've posted to us will be answered and documented, and the entire event, along with the questions and answers, will be housed on OJJDP's Training Center website, which you see the slide in front of you. Before I say goodbye and bid adieu, I want to remind everybody to please take 5 minutes to complete the online evaluation. It lets us know what a good job we have done, and hopefully ways that we can improve when we provide this service to you again. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, for more information, the websites that you see in front of you. Specifically, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, www.whitehouse.gov/ONDCP. The Department of Justice Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, www.ojp.usdcov/FBNP/about.htm. And lastly, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, www.ojjdp.gov. And, my agency, and SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, www.samhsa.gov. Thank you again for your time and your participation, and we all say good afternoon.